Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark. Today, we are joined by Heather Hayes for the topic of clinically complex interventions. Diana, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Brandy. I am thrilled to introduce, and probably not introduce, many of you to Heather Hayes. And part of this reason is that Heather and I have been navigating this world of interventions and family strategies and shifting the system for many years now, and we've never sat down and had a conversation. So I'm really excited to have her. She went to Emory. She graduated from Antioch University with a master's. She has all of those skill sets that make a good interventionist, including training in both the Johnson method and the ARISE. So welcome, Heather. Welcome
Thank
to the
you.
show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, really a privilege. And I'm grateful to be here. Beautiful, sunny, almost spring day here in Georgia. So I'm just honored and
Yeah.
look forward to having a conversation.
So before we get into any clinically complex questions, how did you get to do this work? What brought you to this field?
That's a great question. And it does kind of tie in to working with clinically complex clients. So my journey started out as a personal journey. I was at the University of Georgia and was 21 years old and had been struggling back and forth. I thought maybe if I changed my major to psychology, it would help me not drink and do so much cocaine and get in so much trouble. So sort of eventually worked. I won't say that changing the major worked right away, but I ended up in rehab at 21. And once I sort of sobered up, understood I had an illness, obviously the majority of my use, if you're getting sober at 21, was that of a teenager and young adult. And I just felt this, I mean, honestly, calling, like more than anything I knew or wanted, I wanted to be a therapist. And I particularly at that point in time wanted to work with teenagers and young adults. So I continued to study psychology. I did not go back to University of Georgia and did my undergraduate at Emory and then went up to graduate school at Antioch, which allowed me to live in Boston and we did an ongoing internship where I worked with heroin addicts out of the Boston projects. Came back down south. I actually uh, joined I had my master's degree, came back and actually got into the child and family clinical psychology program at Georgia State, working on my doctorate. And I just got so busy. I helped start an adolescent unit, had a very busy private practice. And by the time I'd taken all the classes that really, I had about, back then it took about 8 to 9 years to get your doctorate. So I was about 5 years in and was already had a full private practice, was publishing, speaking. So I decided I didn't have to be doctor. I had gotten, took everything, I had this craving for knowledge. And so, which I think was a big part of what helps in being an interventionist today and working with difficult, complex clients. But I had a large private practice for years. And then probably around 2000, I went from, and I mean like a 50 client a week. I trained in everything I could: play therapy, gestalt therapy, psychomotor therapy, several experientials, family systemic therapy, Ericksonian therapy. So I had this hunger to just keep learning and getting trained. And then I would say around, I trained in equine therapy because I have horses and kept, I would say probably around 2000, I kept looking for something a little different. It was getting a little sedentary for me. Trained with the FBI as a hostage negotiator. And then I started doing more interventions. I had been originally trained in 86 in intervention. And I would do a handful of interventions early on. I did consulting work at a facility that treated addicted physicians. And I would go out with another one of the individuals there and we would help do those interventions. But I didn't love it. I didn't like lying to people on the front end to get them to the meeting. And as a woman in recovery, I felt like, I'm going to lie to you, tell you we're going to have a tea party. You're going to come. And I'm going to be like, no, you have to go get honest. But we started on this dishonest note. It just didn't feel right. And I didn't particularly care for the coming in with a dirty laundry list of everything the person had done wrong. So around turn of the millennium, I became exposed to different models. Arise, Bill Maher helped introduce me to family systemic, and the had come along and had changed and tweaked and really, I think, revamped the Johnson model. And I said, oh, this I can do. I really enjoy this. I like the front end work. So that's sort of a, long story short to how I got to where I'm at.
So that is great. Let's talk about the difference, just for those few people who are listening, who don't know about the difference between, say, an ARISE method and a Johnson method. Can you tell us a little bit about both of those?
Absolutely. I think one of the bigger differences, and then again, if you ask me what model do I work with, what do I think a new interventionist would need to learn, I'd start by saying it's not an entry level position. I do believe that you should have extensive training. It's my belief that, particularly if you're working with mental health, that you should have a clinical graduate degree. I also think that you should study all the models of intervention. It was a little bit of how I was trained in graduate school. I really love the work of Arnold Lazarus, who came in and talked about studying all the different, as many different models as you could.
Yeah.
And then from that, having tools in your toolbox so that you're able to work, feel comfortable, that you're able to think outside the box to meet clients, even if the client's the family where they're at. So the difference though between the sort of three basic models, which would be family systemic, ARISE, and Johnson comes from a more of a surprise. There's the transparency on the front end.
Show A&E.
The show A&E, you're not going to be given a heads up.
Mhm.
Although at A&E they all have psychological testing and stuff before they even go on, so there's a bit more of a heads up than walking into a family. But the other two models are more transparent and by invitation. So it depending on the model, and again, safety always comes first. There are times where you can't say to someone, hey, we love you, we want to get together and have a family meeting, because you have a teenager who's going to run, you have domestic violence, you have other safety, child endangerment, safety issues. So it's always safety first at looking at which model you work from. But I also believe, part of what I've worked on has been developing more trauma responsive models to come in and work for intervention, for even transporting of adolescents, and coming in and really trying to, trauma survivors don't like surprise. Predictability is safer and more comfortable. So however much we can come in and give a little bit of information heads up, I think is important, particularly if someone has trauma in their background. And I think if we really look at the statistics, and given the fact that we worked with a certain particular part of the bell curve, the truth is that we should work assuming all of our clients have got trauma in their history.
Agreed. I mean, if you look at the statistics, 1 out of 4 women have sexual abuse trauma. So there's a million other kinds of trauma in addition
That's
to
right.
that. I think one of
There's
the
even
ways,
trauma. There's even the trauma that I think that individuals do to themselves. We talk about the 4 different types of trauma, whether it's, we're the victim, we victimize someone else, we are a witness of victimization, vicarious trauma, or there's also traumatizing, again, if I do things that go against my moral compass. If I am, 20 years old and I'm a heroin addict and I don't have any money, and I know if I sleep with my drug dealer, I can have drugs, have I been raped? Have I traumatized myself? Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's even the trauma that just simply through having addiction or other mental health issues that we do into ourselves.
at one time I ran a women's group of young women and asked the question after many weeks, how many of you, raise your hands if any of you had either had sex against your will or sex against your compass, your moral compass. And every single one of those women in that room raised their hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if we come in as helping professionals and do more shaming, how is that in fact helping? Right?
Exactly. And families carry shame, mental health issues, addiction carries shame. And so really to come in, it's not necessary. When I went through treatment in the 80s, it was very different. I went into treatment, it was 1982, and there was some merging into believing more and having more of an understanding of it being a disease, but there was still some of the theory that you kind of had to really hit hard and kind of tear people down and build them back up. And it was painful. It was shaming. I mean, I already felt bad enough about myself, that I don't know that that was really necessary. So one of the beautiful things has been watching the industry, or I hate to say calling it the industry, but our field, really grow and develop into more compassionate care, and even looking at like treating young adults differently, because developmentally they're in a different state than the 40-year-olds, all of that.
I agree. I agree. I've loved to seeing where this field has gone. I started doing interventions right around 2000 as well. And when I first started, it was definitely tie on the cape, fly out, and address the IP, the identified person, as opposed to working with the whole system to change the IP.
Right, right.
And now I look at this very differently. I mean, again, safety first. There are moments when we have to fly out in that cape. If there's somebody who's about to die of a heroin overdose, we do that. But
Absolutely.
there are as many cases as not where that is not called for or necessary.
Right.
So clinically complex, let's imagine, do you think about doing interventions, or are there rule out categories for you when you think about interventions, like psychosis, or what are the conditions where you would just say this is not an appropriate mechanism?
I don't think I've ever said that. Because I think if we take the belief, which I do, that we need to work with the entire family system, that we need to come in and shift. So if my client is the family system and I've got someone with psychosis, then I need to begin to help the family's reaction, how they approach the person. And particularly with psychosis, for example, I've quit predicting. There have been times, I always prepare the family, a lot of education on the front end. Again, and let me back up and say one of the things that I believe that's so important when working with clinically complex clients is that you work with a team. It is too intense. It's too much for just one person to really do and do well.
Smart.
So we take a team approach. We probably have, again, if someone calls in from a crisis, I would say we probably have anywhere from 20 to 40 hours of contact and working with a family before we even attempt to come in and meet with their loved one who's suffering. So I've also quit, there have been times when, quit predicting. There have been times when I've said, this person is floridly psychotic. I don't know how this is going to even work. And yet I go in, and the next thing you know, the person, we're on a plane headed out. We've somehow been able to have a moment of clarity. We've been able to come with to an approach that works. There are other times where we need to bring in other systems. Which may include commit against will, which may include guardianship, again, depending on where a person's psychosis has taken them. And I think, again, I had a client about 6 months ago who had a first psychotic break in their late 30s, which is unusual, very successful business person who became extraordinarily paranoid, no substance use, and firearms, so it was a dangerous situation. So literally through working with the family, other support, we were able to get him into treatment. It took about 2.5, 3 months of diligent work into treatment. We're finally able to get him onto the antipsychotics, and now he's doing quite well. He's come back down, and I've never met him face to face.
Yeah.
So, whereas that's not the norm, I think the important thing is really thinking outside the box and really working to support the family and continuing, for it to be our role as clinicians to figure out what's working, what's not working, so that we're able to really have the best approach possible.
Mhm, mhm. In doing this work, what is your biggest point of frustration? I can empathize with this. I'm just curious. When do you say, oh my God, I am going to lose it? What is that moment for you? What's that frustration? Not necessarily with the IP, but in a scenario.
I tend to, it's not uncommon that families will derail and have a hard time, but I have a lot of compassion for that. I feel like they really, the family members have PTSD from it all as well. They are struggling, they're watching their loved ones self-destruct. I would say the place where I get the most frustrated is more around the unethical things going on out in the industry. Places marketing themselves to do something that they don't really do, or patient brokering, or places that don't communicate well or don't respond to the families in an appropriate way. That's really more my frustration area.
Yeah, I can see that. I
Yeah.
can see that. Mine, I am a little less generous than you, Heather. I get to a point where I might say, and sometimes I've worked with families for years, over a period of years, and there are times, I don't use the word, as many of you know, enable, because I feel like that can have a shaming connotation. I use the word protect, but sometimes that very form of protection, when the family just can't seem to make the change. And I don't like to use, dramatics like you're killing your son or your daughter. It's not helpful. But I do find myself getting frustrated.
Yeah, of course. It can. I mean, I can too as well. And often family members will be willing to go and do their own work, is an important part, but
They don't.
sometimes they won't. They're just so, again, been taken hostage, I like to think of it, by mental health issues and addiction, that they're not able to break free. And I agree. I don't like the way some of those terms like enabling have turned into these shaming. I have mothers who come in and are like, I am the worst mom, I'm an enabler.
Enabler, right? Yeah.
Love your child fiercely. Let's talk about different ways to love. I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask you to step outside of your comfort zone.
Right.
Help support you with this, but it's gonna be difficult because you're gonna want to reach in. So that's
I
hard.
want to make the status quo okay. That's what I notice.
Yeah.
Arden, our fearless leader, talks about when in the middle of her brother's struggle, that um, her parents, when he relapsed, said, well, but it's only cocaine. It's not heroin. So that, notion that you lower the bar at some points and that the family does that, not the IP.
Right. Or the family members who, how now, because their brain chemistry has become so dysregulated, they're actually going out and buying the cocaine for their child because they think it's better for them to go. They don't want to send their kid into an unsafe neighborhood.
Yeah.
So again, but if you'd asked mom that 5 years ago, she'd say, I'd never do that. But that's the progression and
Of
how
their disease too. Do
yes.
you use the word codependence? Out of curiosity, I am morphing my thinking about the word, but I'm curious, as a fellow person who does this work, do you use the word codependence?
I think when it comes to labels, codependent, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, it gives clinicians, like, we know what we're talking about. It gives us a language, but I've never loved labels. And so I think as a descriptor when we're having team meetings or team staffing, but when talking with individuals, I think it's better, more compassionate practice to talk about what we're seeing, what's fueling that, the trauma underneath, the desperation, the fear, and to really shift it in that way. I've just found that, like, labeling and I mean, really, if coming in and tough love and labeling was gonna, stop parents, calling them sick. I can't stand that when people talk about how sick the families are. If that was going to work, we would have like knocked out addiction in the 80s because we were cracking everybody over the head with those labels. So.
Right, right. I remember my first intervention, and I was working with an organization, and they said the family's really sick, and I hung up and I was like, what does that mean? So I went out, got my books out, and just went, families, what does that mean, in fact? Yeah. So as Brandy noted on the chat, we are open to questions. If anybody has any, use the chat feature. We would love to expand this conversation if some people have questions of Heather or myself. Anybody? Okay, we'll keep talking. I'll keep picking Heather's brain until.
Good, yeah.
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 What scenario, and I'm not asking you to violate privacy, what was your biggest intervention when you think about a learning curve for you? What was your intervention? Do you remember it?
It's interesting because I had, became a therapist so young. I mean, I've been a therapist now for, I've been working this, with addiction and mental health issues for almost 38 years.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really been, continuing to pull together and put tools in my toolbox. There's not really, I mean, I can think of some hard ones. I mean, I can think of times where I have felt uh scared because I've gone into a dangerous neighborhood, or, again, I am pretty good about, my team would probably say they get more scared than I do. I've been interacting with, violent young adults. I had a woman try and open a plane door on a private plane when we were up in the air. That was not good. That was hard.
That was a lesson, right?
It rattled me. But fortunately, we were flying air ambulance. We had a nurse. I had another person with me, so we were able to handle it. But that was difficult. I didn't care for that too much. But I think, again, there are times that stand out. Of interventions that went well. There are times where I'm always asking myself, what could I have done differently? And for me, I think the important part is to just keep learning and, also trying to, I had a professor in graduate school at Antioch, Dr. Bill Abruzzi. He was a psychiatrist. He had been the medical director at Woodstock. He was just a cool guy. And he taught child adolescent psychopathology. And in that class, his biggest message to us was, if you step in, like, keep your ego out of it. If you step in and you say, I saved this person's life, I helped this person, they got better because of me. He was like, then you're going to also have to take responsibility for all the ones who don't do well. And that the important thing is really, I mean, with intervention in particular, it's teamwork. It's not me. I'm a blip in the family's lives. I'm there, and then hopefully I am not for that, because they are able to take the work, sustain it, and move forward. And that, I think, is the most important thing. So when you ask me that question, I can think of families that have pulled together and beautifully and just like warriors made these changes and done things differently. I've seen individuals step forward and embrace the recovery, embrace the work, where the families didn't, and they were able to move forward. I've seen bold individuals get the help and move the whole family into
Love
healing.
that one. Yeah.
And those are the stories that stick out for me. And really not because of anything I did. I mean, I was there. I mean, I try and do the right thing. I try and learn, try and, continue.
The vehicle. You're not the engine.
That's right. That's right.
That's how I look at it.
And it's always a red flag. Like if I see people, for example, coming onto Facebook and saying, like, first off, I think it's inappropriate to be on Facebook talking about the intervention you just did with a 23-year-old female, and like, it's so inappropriate. But then to also come from that place of, here's what I did, I saved a life, again, it's a dangerous place, because it's,
Agreed, 100%.
yeah.
Hi, Brandy. Do you
Hello.
have a question for us?
Yes, we have a question in the chat from Melissa,
Okay.
and she would like to know, can you speak to the impact of COVID on your work?
Absolutely, it's a great question. So we have probably had one of the busier years that we've had. It has looked a little bit different in that we've done more case management on the front end, where we're working with the families a little more. So we've had situations where the person has gone ahead and gotten into treatment because we're working with the family system. We have, again, followed all of the COVID CDC protocols in our work. There was about a 4-week time period where I wasn't intervening or traveling, but then I was back out on the road. So in the interventions, again, we were very selective of who we would let come. People who were high risk had to Zoom in. I've done some Zoom interventions. It's been different. So we've had to really kind of think outside the box, but we've stayed busy. I'm double vaccinated now. Not that that means anything. I just went to Canada last week and I had to get 5 COVID tests in 3 days. So, I have had myself tested regularly, even since being vaccinated, so that I know. I've done interventions where we literally have brought in physicians and each person tested before they were able to come into the room. And then we still wore masks and socially distanced.
That's
So
great.
we have worked really hard to stay safe, keep our families safe. And again, usually the high risk individual is the person that we are wanting to get into treatment. The others are staying safe. And then you've got, someone who's out buying drugs, so everyone's really aware. They may be testing regularly, but their loved one who's struggling isn't. So,
Yeah.
and some of the facilities, a lot of the facilities have done a beautiful job with their COVID protocol as well, and how they're bringing clients in,
Right.
quarantining, testing, purchasing their own testing, so that they're able to test right there, do the antibody testing, so that their clients don't have to stay in quarantine for too long of a time.
I have been really impressed with the way some of the treatment programs have navigated COVID
Yes,
in
yes.
kind ways. Well, we're coming to the end, aren't we, Brandy?
We are. If we have time for one more question, I did have one burning question for you, Heather. You mentioned the idea of tough love and the family giving, their loved one tough love. At what point is that no longer enough and they need someone else to step in to help their loved one?
Tough love just for the purpose of being tough love doesn't make sense. Like, it needs to clinically make sense. And the other thing is, the family has to be in agreement. It can't be an interventionist coming in saying, you have to do X, Y, Z, or you have to kick your kid out, or you're gonna kill your kid. So first off, with some mental health issues, kicking a child out of the house is counterindicated. They will go live on the street. They will disappear. They will be, it's not safe. There are other times where a family may say, we've had it. Our 20-year-old, we have other children in the home, they're bringing drugs in, they're disruptive, we can't take it anymore, and we can help support that. But it's got to make sense, and it's also got to be the kind of thing where you have parameters around how long you let it go on for. So we try and think outside of the box. We had a client with horrific OCD, and we just couldn't get him to move. He didn't want to go. He wasn't going to treatment. The family had said, okay, you have to go live with your aunt, because we're trying to just disrupt the homeostasis. So he went to the aunt's house and then crawled back in the window that night into his parents' house. So we brought a recovery companion in to mirror him and be right there. 2 days later, he said, okay, I can't take it. I'll go. So some of it is thinking outside of the box, thinking
Sure.
about how, again, it can't just be punitive.
You're right.
It's got to have clinical therapeutic value.
Agreed. Agreed. Sometimes I think what we're doing, and this is my last comment for the day, is we are physicists. We are disrupting the status quo to help families reconfigure.
Right. Exactly. So that they can continue on.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Heather
Thank
Hayes.
you so
I
much.
appreciate it. That was fun. It was a
Yeah,
great
it was fun.
conversation.
Great to meet you, and great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.